While some teachers don't like grades, and many students would agree with them, effective assessment and grading is part of our lives every day in the classroom. Today's thought leader and teacher, Starr Sackstein, talks about how to assess with respect, something we all need to consider. This is episode 739, How to Assess with Respect.
Welcome to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast, hosted by author, educator, speaker, and mom, the Cool Cat teacher, Vicki Davis.
So today we're talking with my friend Starr Sackstein about her new book, Assessing with Respect, Everyday Practices That Meet Students' Social and Emotional Needs. Now, how can we assess with respect? And I will say this, my mom, she even put this in her final words that she had read at her graveside, which is hard to believe, but she did. She's a teacher, that she always told us we could never use a red pen, that we had to use a purple or a blue or something that didn't look like blood all over the page. And if we were going to write on somebody's page, we had to write exactly the same on everybody's. Is that part of it, or how do we go further?
So when I was thinking about this whole practice, it's really about respecting the dignity of all the learners in our spaces. And it's not just, with a test or whatever, it's thinking about the whole child. So how do we design them? How do we try to work from a strengths model instead of a deficit model? How do we get student voice and choice into the ways we assess? And how do we give kids every chance possible to be as successful as they can be? So the psychological piece as well, and I never used red ink either. I was always a purple or green person myself. Is we want to encourage learning in a growth mindset in a way that doesn't make learning scary or negative for kids.
Do you even want to talk about the testing that's about to happen when people go back to face-to-face schools? And we may put this on video and then they can see what you just did with your hands. It's yoga.
Yeah. I was very disappointed with this push this year to go back to testing, given the environment. I think it's cruel for teachers and for kids to worry about state testing while the pandemic is still happening. And although we might be on the other side of it right now, we're not in the clear yet. And a lot of schools still haven't returned. And in New York here, it's still kind of a mess. So just the idea of putting high stakes testing in the mix is cruel to me. And I don't think we're going to get the best results, because how could we?
Welcome back to school. Let's take a test. I just, my school is doing testing, but we've been back the whole year face to face, and that's just not been possible everywhere because everybody's in different circumstances, and it's just hard for me to imagine saying, welcome back, let's take a test. So, but let's talk about when we do need to assess, whether it's, let's start with summative assessment, tests, the quizzes. Are there any changes you think that the average everyday teacher might need to consider to have more respect for their learners?
Just having a variety of ways in which we summatively assess, so that, kids who are comfortable with that kind of traditional testing have an opportunity to show what they know in that way, but also have other modes that allow kids that have different aptitudes to show what they know in a different way. So maybe having a portfolio style summative assessment where we're collecting work over time and kids are reflecting and thinking about their learning, and then just having them perform different performance type assessments, if that's a way that better shows what they know, in a variety of different ways. I think we really start coming into a challenge when we are assessing one way all the time or two ways all the time, without giving those learners who might be anxious about testing another way of seeing themselves as learners. Because that's another thing the book really dives into, is this learner identity, and how students need a positive learning identity, and teachers can participate in the formation of a positive learning identity by not labeling kids and putting them in situations where they aren't successful over and over and over again.
Which, we need some variety. I think of the tool Wiser that I use that allows kids to answer by text. It allows them to answer with video. It allows them to answer with audio. And you can even have a collaborative communication in there. So they've got a lot of different features in that particular. And there's other tools that have that. You got Nearpod, you've got other ways that let us do that. So you have a teacher who always is given that paper test, some multiple choice, 5 long answer. Give us some practical examples of where, which I know you're not crazy about grades. So, we know that, but where do we go from there?
So I mean, if you're going to keep going down that road, I would make sure that you offer the opportunity to make corrections afterwards, to let kids reflect on the learning, give them an opportunity to maybe retest if there's certain content that we really want to make sure they master before we move on, and have a more flexible policy where kids do have an opportunity to see the material more than once. Make sure, obviously, they have times before the test to do lots of formative practice so that they could really be ready for that kind of assessment, even if it's practicing 2 multiple choice every day in the style you're going to put on that test, or those longer questions, giving them opportunities to answer similar style questions so that they're not seeing it for the first time when they walk into that, they're walking into that situation.
I love that you said formative because, for me, when I give a test, whether it's, my more difficult topics, binary numbers or whatever, I should never be surprised what kids do because I should already know. For me, I'm not going to test until I've got 90% mastery for all my kids. Like, there's ways you can do that with formative. So help those who are listening understand, what is formative assessment. We're never going to assume we all, get it, because sometimes it can be difficult for some folks to understand because it can look a little summative. And then how do we feed that in to know that we're ready for that summative test?
So to me, it's the opportunity of learning a particular skill, really, really thinking about one thing at a time, giving kids the opportunity to practice that skill in more than one way, getting feedback, revising a little bit more, maybe doing some peer feedback sometimes, and then having some reflection time. So it's a whole cycle. You learn something, you practice it, you get feedback, you go back to do it some more. And then after you go through that whole formative cycle, then you could summatively assess. But like you suggested at the beginning, Vicki, the whole idea that we should know where our kids are before we get them to that summative piece. Like, if you're doing a lot of formative work in your class, you know where your kids are and you know when they're going to be successful. And really, to have no surprises in the classroom is really the best way to go, unless they're good surprises, in which case, let it rip.
Oh, we like good surprises. So the fact that you titled this Assessing with Respect tells me that you think that some or a lot, or I don't know how much, of assessment is with disrespect. Give me some examples of assessing with disrespect that you think do not need to happen in the classroom.
So the issues that really get addressed, like I started to say earlier, with those social emotional pieces, given the year we just had, there's a lot of equity discussions in there. There's a lot of really thinking about individual needs, having personalized learning kind of going on. So for me, a situation that doesn't allow for respectful learning environment is a one size fits all environment where we don't acknowledge the differences of our children and try to work to their strengths. And not a gotcha situation where we're always looking to put kids in a place where it's almost like we want to catch them doing something bad. We should want to catch them doing something good. And the more opportunities we provide for them to build on the strengths they already have and then develop those challenges is really what assessment with respect is to me. It's thinking about every kid and treating them with dignity and honoring the strengths they're bringing to the classroom and contributing to the learning environment.
So fill in the blank. If I could eliminate one thing with assessments, it would be blank.
Points.
Okay.
Just the idea of arbitrary compliance points might be one thing that people could get rid of. Extra credit for late work, taking points off for late work. Once my son had a teacher who took points off because he did a Scantron and pen. Stuff like that, stuff that has nothing to do with learning, that ends up taking away from the communication of academic success.
Okay. So the book is Assessing with Respect, Everyday Practices That Meet Students' Social and Emotional Needs by Starr Sackstein from ASCD Publishing. Thank you, Starr.
Thank you so much, Vicki.
If you enjoyed today's 10-Minute Teacher podcast, why not subscribe on iTunes? You can also catch up with Vicki on Twitter at CoolCatTeacher or level up and learn with her blogs and free resources at CoolCatTeacher.com. Thanks for listening.